Hi all, this video is in response to a request to cover just what happened to the USS Glenn, the ill-fated experiment of 2256, and to cover this let's look at the ship's history. Paul Stamets and Justin Strahl were looking to progress their research as astromycologists, when Commander Zev Rebolts convinced them to take it to Starfleet for the resources they'd receive and the potential for exploration and energy. The USS Glenn was one of two modified crossfield class starships that were created to test the displacement activated Spore Hub drive. The crossfield class seems to have pre-existed in the lore as a slightly different looking vessel with a role in science and development of new technologies. Out of this line of intricate science vessels, two were selected to house the brainchild experiments of the scientists, and underwent extensive modification to house this new system. We don't have an exact date, but it's likely these two vessels were completed around 2256, judging by the crew assignments of the Discovery that we see. The specifics for this project are not for this video, but suffice to say it was investigating the possibility to use Prototaxites stellarviatori spores, a form of subspace fungus, to access a faster-than-warp alternative. In terms of what this meant for the Crossfield class variations, it meant extensive modifications to their superstructure. Now, the only potential originally Crossfield we see is a mismatch and illegitimate copy of a Starfleet vessel, so we cannot take it as completely accurate. But it likely had different warp nacelles and a slightly different saucer section. The saucer of the Discovery and the Glenn infamously had rotating segments that were necessary for the operation of the Spore drive, but it's unlikely such a hefty and as yet unseen function would be added on ships that did not need it. Internally too, the two sister ships had higher security measures than regular science vessels, considering each could house up to 300 ongoing scientific projects at a time. This was a record at the time, and if you're running one top secret experiment, why not others? The Discovery and the Glenn were completed at the San Francisco Fleet Yards with both groundside and orbital construction. However, coinciding with their launch was the eruption of the Klingon Federation War, and the project was co-opted by Starfleet and reallocated as a military research and development program. This vastly irked Paul Stamets and Justin Strahl, who saw it purely as interference in their life's work of exploration, but it was the only way they could continue their experimentation. Several of the changes included the addition of a militant captain, Gabriel Lorca, as the CO of Discovery, and an attachment of Section 31 personnel to the ship, for unknown reasons. The Glenn was given to Captain Deborah Underwood. The ships were deemed high-priority assets, suggesting there may have been more going on than the Spore Drive projects that would ultimately be their downfall. The two starships had different methods of testing the drive, leading to a couple of variations in design, the primary difference being that the Discovery cultivated live spores and was outfitted to be able to terraform viable sites to grow more, while the Glenn merely harvested and stored them for use. The two ships were then kept separate, operating at different points across the Federation and away from the front lines where possible, to preserve their secrecy and with only limited communication between them. Strahl and Stamets were separated and each headed their own development teams, exchanging as much data and intel as they could without defying classifications. However, it was the USS Glenn that would make the biggest breakthrough with the Spore drive, uncovering the existence of a symbiotic tardigrade that utilised the spores to naturally travel in the fashion that Starfleet sought to emulate. They captured the creature, and after studying it, deduced that it could be plugged into the drive and manipulated to pilot it, something that a computer, no matter how advanced, had failed to do, lacking the organic flexibility of thought needed to handle the exponential number of possibilities and paths that opened up the longer a jump was. With this, they were able to perform at least a 90 light-year jump in 1.3 seconds, but it would be their final successful trip. During the war, House Mokai attacked the Delta Valanis station, and the Glenn was one of only 2 ships able to respond to defend it. However, Ju'ula of House Mokai knew that the Glenn was holding some form of research and had timed her attack to draw out the Glenn. During the skirmish, the Glenn had been boarded, and Ju'ula's teams had managed to obtain partial schematics to the spore drive. The crew of the reinforcing vessel were sworn to secrecy by Starfleet Command, told to forget anything they may have seen on the Glenn, and the war continued. By 2256, the USS Glenn went dark, and the Discovery was dispatched to investigate, being the only other crew who had knowledge of the spore drive. The USS Glenn had made its final jump into the mycelial plane, but then it crashed through a Hawking radiation firewall upon exiting the jump. This caused the ship a basidiosic rupture, spinning the ship out, as it was described, and killing the entire crew. In less than 2 seconds from pushing a button, the entire Glenn was rendered a ghost ship. This, combined with the subsequent disappearance of the USS Discovery barely a year later, which was also reported by the Enterprise as a spore drive related explosion, closed the project down for 932 years. Breaking down the events, let's start with the radiation. Hawking radiation is a radiation theorized by Stephen Hawking that is emitted from a black hole, blasting beyond its event horizon because quantum shenanigans. The fact that this radiation is emitted collapses black holes in time, evaporating them. So, the big takeaway here is that such a radiation forms around an intense gravitational effect like a singularity. And in Star Trek, we have seen that gravity doesn't always permeate into layers of subspace, as when we physically go there in the series, they seem to have their own atmosphere and gravity that is not present in real space. So we can assume that the jump was blind, or perhaps not as accurate as anticipated, so they emerged right into the stream of radiation being emitted from a gravity well. This caused a basidiosic rupture. Basidiospores are the reproductive spores of a fungus, so we can assume that there was effectively a containment breach of the spore drive. With the containment out of control, the crossing between the subspace layers was messed up, and you end up with the ship not seamlessly slipping through. Messing up their exit caused extreme helical torsion, which is essentially a fancy way of saying spun or coiled strain, like, say, a ship spinning absurdly fast across its axis. This is something that the spore drive does as part of its operation, and again, from what we see, it's literal. This is because there is a variation between physics between real space and any subspace layer, and in an instant you had the ship crashing through multiple layers to re-enter space-time, being subjected to way too much stress. So, the radiation messed up whatever effect usually protects the ship on exit from the extreme rotational effects caused by a breach in spores being used. I'm assuming the inertial dampeners failed in this event, as this is what destroyed the entire crew, considering we find them in such a mangled state, broken from the intense forces they were suddenly subjected to, as their physical matter was pushed through several layers of different existence. The vessel was scuttled by its sister ship, being destroyed to prevent any of its other experiments or data falling into the hands of the Klingon Empire, while the Glenn's logs, data and tardigrade were recovered by the Discovery. These were utilised in furthering Paul Stamets' research before being reported as lost with the Discovery in 2258, bringing the tale to a close. All details regarding the event were classified. As far as the greater galaxy was concerned, it never existed. By the 2260s, There were crossfield class starships designed in the same style as the Discovery and Glenn, perhaps to obfuscate the appearance of the two experimental vessels, or perhaps simply because, well, making a ship with such expansive science divisions was too solid an idea to leave untouched. But none since contained the same experimental drive as the two lost starships. As far as the history books go, the Glenn was just another science ship lost out there in the void, like so many smaller ships had and would do since. Perhaps even a casualty of war, who's to say? Thanks for watching this breakdown on just what happened to the Glenn, its short-lived life and role in the fleet. I've been Rick, and until the next one, thanks again, and goodbye.